can you state the truth as you see it in a way that can be heard, that can be thought about in a friendly way, in a way that respects people while discussing ideas. And so this is the concept of the gentle answer.
Welcome to every one of you out there and to another part of our virtual alumni speaker series, COD Talks. These talks are presented to you by KIS and KFI, Coady Friends International. And it's truly great to see so many of you gathered there tonight virtually. Now, for the important part, the talk we've all been waiting for, of looking beyond the gentle answer and more with Dr. Gordon Nicol. This is a discovery talk that will go through the life and works of Dr. Gordon Nicol from class of 71. Gordon relates himself to being a Bruton boy, and it's nice to see so many of his Bruton friends here tonight in the audience. Gordon is a retired professor of Islamic studies who has taught at the University of British Columbia and the University of Calgary, Canada, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, Chicago, and at the South Asian Institute of Advanced Christian Studies, Bangalore, or Bengaluru. He completed his PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Calgary, focusing on the narratives of tampering in the earliest commentaries of the Quran. After his master's at SOAS University of London, Gordon and his wife spent time in Karachi, Pakistan, where he taught Hebrew in Urdu in the Church of Pakistan Seminary. And as we were just discussing before, he is absolutely talented in speaking several languages, and it has made a resounding impact on his research and ability to break barriers as well. Gordon has published several books, including The Quran with Christian Commentary, A Guide to Understanding Scripture of Islam, and The Gentle Answer to the Muslim Accusation of Biblical Falsification. He also enjoys creating fiction. In 2020, he published Margins of Mizan, a Shafqat Beg mystery. Did I pronounce that right, Gordon?
That's right, good. Shafqat Beg. Yeah.
Good, all right. Sitting across Gordon and helping to guide the flow of conversation is none other than Gordon's classmate and friend, Kathy Johnson Narney. Kathy Johnson joins us from Tucson, Arizona, and most of you know her parents, Reverend Gay Johnson and the late Mrs. Ginny Johnson. Kathy was born in Gujarat and spent many of her early years in Pune and still calls Pune her hometown. Kathy received her BA in History and French from Asbury University and has a Master's in Divinity from Fuller Seminary, where she continues to teach at a semi-retired state. Kathy currently serves at the board of Coady Friends International, where she, like many other board members, help facilitate and support the educational mission and vision of KIS and its alumni. Kathy joined KIS at the same time as Gordon, and they're both graduated together. And so I, like many of you here, are looking forward to see the camaraderie on screen. And we thank you both for taking the time to program this session tonight and to take time to present it as well. So let's not wait much longer. Kathy, I hand over the mic to you.
Thank you, Manjusha. It's a joy to be here and to do this, and especially Gordon, to welcome you here. It's been fun to kind of reconnect with you and some of our classmates. It's hard to believe, I know we don't look it, but it's hard to believe that it's been 50 years ago that we graduated from this small school in the Palni Hills in South India. I'd like to begin by asking you to tell us a little bit about your years in Coady and in India, perhaps in general, and the impact that you feel Coady had on yourself and maybe other students like us, like where you lived when you were there, maybe a funny story, some, some other points of interest about those early years.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad we're doing this as a conversation rather than simply a talk. And especially after meeting in Durango, Colorado, for our 50th class celebration. It was great to see you and Steve. And well, I think for me, I was 12 when I got to Cody. I know we all reached there at different ages and not all feel the same as I did, but at 12, I took the whole thing as a big adventure. It was a new world for me, like going up the Ghat Road and experiencing the sounds and feelings there. Getting up to Cody, it was cooler than where I'd been near Hyderabad with my parents. And I just loved it really for the next 5.5 years that I was able to attend till graduation. And I think my experience there, Kathy, is probably in at least 3 areas. One was at the school with the students, the classes, and the courses, the dramas, the music, all the great things, the sports. The second was at my boarding, which many of you remember as Bruton. In my day, it was one big forest, and it was a wonderland for a 12-year-old. And the third then is the physical surroundings of Cody, of the lake, of the town, of the hills around, of the hikes we did, of going down to Tope and back, and getting this feeling of space and freedom. For me, it was freedom in that space. The school was really helpful for me in the sense that there were so many opportunities in each of my years there. There were opportunities for improve your studies. I remember the National Honor Society. For sports, we had some kind of athletic club there. There was drama, there was music. It was actually always too much for me, too many opportunities. I couldn't pick up on them all. But it was something that drew me forward in my studies and my intellectual development. And it was great for those 5.5 years to have no TV, no smartphones, nothing to distract you from this wonderful world that was Cody. The second thing, though, I have to mention is that the boarding. So this is a picture now of this is a picture of my brothers and my dad. My dad tried to make things fun there for us by building this hot rod. At the Bruton boarding, it was used to be called outboardings, right? There was a faith component. This is the reason why many of the outboardings existed, to maintain the Christian faith and encourage the students in the Christian faith. And so that was an experience for me in that place. And just because our parents are Christians, many of our parents were missionaries, just because people that, maybe some of the adults at Cody were Christians, doesn't mean the children or the students will take on that faith. That has to be a personal decision. And I think I rebelled as well as anyone against, what was given me in that area. But something happened to me in grade 10, but especially 11 and 12. I had a number of experiences that told me that this faith is not just for the grown-ups, not just for my parents, that it's a living faith, it's a lively faith. And so I began to own that in grade 12. and I was baptized in Cody Lake, there by where we used to swim in the lake near Lower Bendy. So that was very formative, and some of those things, some of those commitments I made then have carried through all the way till today. About a funny story though, I was thinking, Kathy, what was, I guess the most ridiculous thing in my time in Cody was the incredible awkwardness that we adolescent boys had with the girls. Like, you know, so I was 12 when I started. You know, not all the boys were so sort of clueless as I was. I mean, I didn't know what to do or think or say. But well, some of us suffered this together. And so I remember a hike that we made, I think it was to Pumbari. And so we had, you know how you have to go across the Gundar Valley there. And I guess you stop for a swim while there. Well, some of the guys said, hey, the girls have changed and they've left their clothes in the, you know, in the elephant grass. Let's steal their clothes. Well, that was, I would have never thought of that. But there was a really smooth guy named Curtis Nordine, and he was talking like this, and so they hid the clothes of those girls. I don't know how it came out, you know, in the end. I don't know how it came out, but man, oh man, were we awkward. Oh, here I am, you know, going to the Christmas banquet. You can see, well, you can see how awkward I am in that white jacket. That's pretty typical. And so I think that's one of the funny things about my experience there, Kathy.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm curious, you know, where did your dorm parents get all those white jackets? That's, I don't remember seeing a white jacket at Cody. Well, I love that funny story. And I'm sure there are many, many others. And you've kind of expressed this already in what you've said, but Cody, it appears, has really helped create the lens through which you see the world. That's probably safe to say. And it set you on the path, if you will, to becoming a global citizen, or as some people call us, boarding school people, global nomads, which I think is a pretty appropriate word. So that lens through which you see the world has directly contributed to your passion for the academic work that you have done over the years. Can you say, I'd like to have you give us another rundown, a quick rundown, even though Manjusha mentioned your academic accolades, but can you say a little bit more about what it is about Cody and India that has often encouraged her students to think outside the box in their various pursuits and interests, and along with that, summarize some of the work that you've done, how you were led into it, and excuse me, in a more specific way, and go from there.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that perspective that Cody gives, and that was the case with me too. You're an international student. I wonder if other students had this experience of going back to their, you know, the place where their family came from in North America or Europe, and finding the other, your contemporaries, not so worldly wise, sort of preoccupied with local things and not seeming to care about international developments. And that's a very positive thing. You also mentioned this fact that many of us, because of all the moves with our family, we tend to be kind of rootless. We move easily. We start new cultures easily, but we also have some weak points, and this is the case with me too. A kind of rootlessness in this world, and well, I won't talk too much about that. I'm not a psychologist, but about how things went. So after high school, I went for 2 years to a little kind of Bible school, Bible Institute in near Vancouver. This was the tradition in my church, the Mennonites, that many in those years, many of the young people would learn about their faith, learn about the Bible for a couple of years, and then go into university. And I did that, and I really benefited tremendously from it, and got to really love and know the Bible well, and know my faith well. Started a really strong faith. And then when I went to university, my first degree was in English literature. And I think here's a Cody link. I'd like to shout out to the Granners, if there's any out there. Bob Granner was doing an advanced placement English class in grade 12. And that was a fun class. You know, we adolescent boys, I don't think we liked English at all. I don't know what it was about it. You know, it was sort of cool to be good in science or something. But in grade 12, I got into this incredible class. And we read all these interesting things. We went on a trip to Hyderabad. We performed a drama. It was great. And you formed class friends on a new level. And so, you know, after, you know, entering university, I wanted to like discuss ideas. I wanted to read and discuss and read poetry and read novels and stories. And so that's what I did, and I really enjoyed it. And then my first job was as an editor, so I could use that. I mean, how do you get a job with a degree in English literature, right? But I was able
exactly.
to. Well, after a number of years as an editor, then I wanted to know my faith in greater detail. So I took training in biblical studies and theology, as I think you did too, Kathy, at the master's level. And that was in California too. And that was great. And so thankful for 2 years there. But then my wife and I agreed to a mission assignment in Karachi, Pakistan, to teach in the seminary there, the seminary of the Church of Pakistan. And for that, you need to know something about Islam. So I didn't at that point know much about Islam. But the mission was willing to send us to a very good school, SOAS in London. And that was our introduction to Islam and Urdu and Islam in South Asia, the history of Islam there. And then when we came back from that, now we're in the mid-90s, I thought, well, you know how to read the Arabic script from Urdu. Why don't you go for it? Learn Arabic, learn how to read the Quran in Arabic, and take things to a higher level. So that was my PhD studies. So I don't know how organic all that is, but it was a tremendous, again, an adventure in education that continues. And it wasn't until I was late 50s that I finished that long course of studies with the PhD.
Gordy, did you tell me, I think that you also did some commentary work about the Quran, wrote some commentaries about the Quran, or
yeah, that's right. In recent years, then a company in Grand Rapids, it's Harper Collins Christian, or Zondervan, asked me to write a commentary on the Quran. So we did that.
Wow.
And it was, can you imagine what a great opportunity that is for a publisher to actually sponsor that? And so I did that. And so what it is it's the complete text of the Quran, which is about as long as the New Testament, in a good translation. And then I got to write comments at the bottom of the pages to explain things, to interact with things. And so that was published in 2020. And
Okay.
yeah, so thankful for that opportunity
Yeah.
from the publisher.
Well, in 2015, though, prior to that, you published a book called The Gentle Answer to the Muslim Accusation of Biblical Falsification. And that's from where we got the title for this talk, Finding the Gentle Answer. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work? What was the impetus for it? And what do you mean by the gentle answer?
Yeah. I guess a good entry to this is those years then in Pakistan from 88 to 94, when you begin to make Muslim friends.
Mm-hmm.
And you've learned the language, you can speak your meanings in Urdu, you can understand each other. You meet ordinary Muslims who may be trained in the traditional ways, or a lay Muslim, so to speak. And you have a lot of good experiences. But one of them that happens for Christians is as you start to converse about your beliefs, there's a question of about sources, and do the sources support what you believe? Of course, there's the Quran and other books for Muslims. For Christians, the Bible, Hebrew Bible and New Testament. So what do you do when your friend says, hey, Gordon, you know what? Your Bible is corrupted and falsified. And so whatever it says is unreliable and probably false. So you're wanting to converse. It's a true interfaith conversation. You're talking about your ideas, and these kinds of things come up. So then when I had a chance to do a PhD, I talked with my supervisor, and he agreed that this was a good theme, the so-called accusation against the Bible that is falsified, in Arabic, tahrif. It's a famous, it's 1400 years old. It's got a huge history. And so my supervisor liked it as, as a dissertation in intellectual history. I liked it that way too, but also it's relevant. It's something that's going on now. It's if you would talk to any Muslim friend, it would likely come up. So I thought, win-win. And then after that, we had friends in India who were saying, but Gordon, we're getting hit with these accusations in India. They're sophisticated, they're backed up, for example, by 18th century German scholarship. My goodness. He says, how can we answer this? Now, you've got a PhD. What are you doing with your PhD? Well, I was teaching at the time in Canada. You need to help us out. What would you do with that? I mean, how do you do that? How would you support yourself? And this was our dilemma, our challenge. But we decided to do it. And so that's that book, Kathy, The Gentle Answer to That Accusation. There's two parts. First, if you're talking about serious matters of truth, you have to come up with a good case with evidence, with sources. That's the intellectual part. But there's also the relationship part.
Right.
How will you discuss this? How will you make your case? How will you present your case? How will you treat the person with whom you're talking? Can you listen to other points of view? Can you incorporate them? Can you adjust to them? Can you state the truth as you see it in a way that can be heard, that can be thought about in a friendly way, in a way that respects people while discussing ideas? And so this is the concept of the gentle answer. That is, we got it from a verse in the book of Proverbs.
Okay.
Proverbs 15:1. Some of you know the old version. A gentle answer turns away wrath. In other words, instead of shouting at each other and being angry, a gentle answer can continue the conversation. And this is what I aimed for that book, Gentle Answer, to answer the question, but to answer it in a friendly and respectful way.
Okay. Okay. That's very helpful. The world has been riveted by the conflagration happening in the Ukraine, between Russia and the Ukraine. What may have gone under the radar is that a mosque was just bombed a couple of days ago in Peshawar in Pakistan. And I wonder what kind of response, having lived there, what kind of response you had to that bombing. Nobody has taken responsibility for that. And in a broader way than how you feel that the gentle answer or finding a gentle answer is so critical to the world that we live in today.
Yeah, you mentioned Peshawar as a recent event, and in the past 20 years, say since 9/11, we have many of these kinds of stories. Right. Now, that particular conflict is between different groups within Islam, or sects within Islam, the majority Sunnis and the minority Shia. And that goes back right to the beginnings of Islam, when the Muslims were wondering how to administer this kingdom that they were conquering, and there was conflict about that. So this is extreme, that your differences of history or belief would actually lead to killing. In this case, with a bomb in a mosque. That is Shia Muslims worshiping, but a degree of anger and a degree perhaps of hatred that says, even though they're worshiping, we can kill them. In fact, it's a good place to kill them in the mind of these killers, because they're gathered there. And I don't mean to say this lightly. It's a very serious thing. So what do we do with conflicts in the world? So at every level, including here in North America or Europe, we disagree about things.
Right.
How are you going to process those disagreements? And I think anyone listening is with me here, that it's a relevant question. People are splitting up all over the place on all kinds of issues, and it's creating a lot of anger, hatred. This idea that if you don't agree with someone, you are free to put them down.
Right. Yeah.
That you can slander them. You can call them you can call them the worst names you can think of, because you don't agree with their ideas. It's unbelievable. I think it's worse than when we were in Cody. It's really, really bad. And between faiths, people believe things very, very strongly.
Right.
I mean, they'll die for these things. They'll kill for these things in some cases. So this is the question, the more general question that I know that you and I share, is that how do you process differences in a way that picks up on the ideas in the name of truth, but builds up the relationship in the interest of living together, in living peaceably in community? Because our societies are full of people who believe different things.
Yeah. And as global citizens, that's something we're really called to do. I mean, it used to be people lived in this little area, this little box or whatever, and we need to get out of that box, as we kind of mentioned, and how do we live together, and seeing what's in the world around us today, although the positive is the unity that has come from so many of the other countries in relationship to what's going on in the Ukraine, but also some of the terrorist attacks and everything. To switch tacks just a little bit though, as prolific as your academic work has been, you've also moved, and you can speak more to that if you will, there might be other things, but you've also moved beyond that arena with a novel. And you presented it to us at the reunion that we had. It's Margins of the Mizan. And I really enjoyed reading that book. And it was published in 2020. The cover kind of reminds me of Egmore Station, you know, so it, which almost all Cody kids who went to Cody had to go through Egmore Station. But can you tell us a little bit about the novel? What encouraged you or interested you in kind of changing tacks from doing strictly academic to writing a novel, although it's very much in the same vein, and maybe a little bit more about where you lived and what brought this, what inspired this kind of a book, which is really fascinating.
Sure. Well, Kathy, we talked before about moving between cultures and how that strengthens us in some ways.
Yes.
And in some ways it challenges us emotionally,
Right.
Perhaps mentally, to have a grip on what's going on, and to be able to process tough and challenging experiences and feelings and relationships. And after Pakistan in particular, in about 95, Pakistan was tough. I mean, I thought when I was younger I could handle anything. I probably got that confidence from Cody.
Right, right.
But Pakistan was tough. It went beyond all my resources, and I just was totally challenged the whole time. It's one thing to learn languages. It's a city of 15 million. I mean, it just, so how do you process that? You know, you end up after a couple of terms, and so I did write a book at that time called Peaceable Witness Among Muslims, which sort of dealt with the approach to friendship and evangelism with Muslims. But what about all those other feelings and difficulties that we face? And so for many, probably other Cody people too, they'll process that through fiction. And it's kind of a therapy. It's sort of working out some of the things in an imaginative way rather than a you know, theological way or, you know, intellectual way. And so that's what happened with this novel. So I set the novel in Karachi, Pakistan, during the time we were there. And there was a famous event that happened to sort of anchor the action of the novel, and that was the destruction of the Babri Masjid. I don't know if you following the history, the sort of Hindu-Muslim conflict over a mosque in Ayodhya, right?
Right.
And so that was my sort of time anchor, but from there everything went imaginative. And I was wondering, should I read a little bit of that just to get a flavor of it?
I was hoping you would, yes.
Well, it's imagining a murder mystery in that chaos of Karachi. And the action here is a Muslim bookseller named Shafkat and his friend Charles Parker, who's a Christian there in Karachi. And they're searching a tower to find clues for the whereabouts of a person who's in danger. And they just come down from the tower, and that's where we are here. I opened the door a crack and saw no one, but then Parker leaned against the door and it swung wide. There was a man standing to the right, about 10 feet away in the direction of Abdul Jabbar's onion stall. I thought at first it must be the chowkidar, but this man had wrapped his head and face in a brown chadar. And instead of challenging us, as the chowkidar would have done, the man turned and began to run. I had seen none of his facial features, but as he ran, I saw he was wearing light-colored Sindhi chappals. He ran down the stairs toward the path through the market. For a moment, we stood and watched, too surprised to know what to do. Then Parker said, "Hurry, lock the door, let's chase him." There was no time to ask him why, but I remember thinking that he must have taken a good knock on his head up in the tower. I closed the door and fastened the lock as quickly as I could, but Parker berated me with "Jaldi, jaldi," and almost wrenched my right arm out of its socket, trying to pull me along with him. By this time, the figure in the chadar had disappeared into the passageway at the far end of the market. We ran after him as fast as we could. When we emerged through the dark passageway into the tanga stand, there was no sign of the man, but a tanga was just pulling away in the direction of Agra Taj. "He's in that tanga," Parker shouted. I could only see the passengers in silhouette against the bright lights of the street, and there was no way to know whether the figure I had seen was in the tanga. But Parker ran down the steps to the next tanga in line and shouted, "Follow that tanga." Yes, that's actually what he said, in Urdu, of course. I could not help but think of the phrase from old movies I had seen many years before. Parker quickly negotiated to pay the whole way to Agra Taj, and the tanga set off at a good clip with Parker in front and me in the back. He had arranged all of this with remarkable speed, but then the driver pulled back sharply on the reins as a huge Baluchistan bus passed by just in front of us from the left, turning the corner up the side of the market. Simultaneously came the deafening blast of the air horn, and then we had to cough through the cloud of diesel exhaust. The driver controlled the horse expertly and pressed on across the intersection. He made good time with the light load, and after a minute of pursuit, we caught sight of the departed tanga. We chased the tanga as far as Osman Park and were able to gain ground. When we caught up to the tanga, just beside a soccer pitch, Parker jumped out and demanded to have a look at the passengers in the tanga. The people all looked bewildered and the driver protested, but Parker was not to be denied. He moved closer in to look under the covering of the tanga. After scrutinizing two individuals in the front, he moved around to the back. Sure enough, there among the three side-by-side figures was a person wrapped in a brown chadar. I moved close to Parker to have a look as well. "What were you doing in Lee Market?" Parker asked boldly in Urdu, not to say recklessly. "I was not in Lee Market," came the timid answer. It was a woman's voice. But this did not stop Parker. "You're lying," Parker said. We saw you there. I looked down at the feet of the figure and saw a pair of black women's chappals on the small feet. I tapped Parker on his arm. "What?" he said roughly, irritated. "This is not the same one," I said firmly. "The person we saw in Lee Market had different chappals. Apart from being taller than this person and clearly running like a man." Parker responded as gracefully as he could in such miserable circumstances. A small crowd of onlookers had begun to gather. Parker's shoulders dropped. Then he asked the woman to forgive him. It was his mistake, he said. He was sorry for causing her trouble. He then walked deliberately to the front of the tanga, faced the driver, and apologized to him as well. He offered a 10 rupee note to the driver, but the driver would not take it. The driver said it did not matter. But to me, his body language clearly indicated he was disgusted with Parker. The driver climbed up into the front of the tanga and set off once more. Our own driver was waiting patiently on the other side of the road, holding the harness of his horse. Like the onlookers, his face bore a quizzical smile. Parker asked him sheepishly to turn the tanga around. We didn't need to go any farther toward Agrataj, he said. Would Parker pay the full fare back to Lee Market, the driver asked. Yes, Parker said quietly, chastened. Parker remained quiet for most of the ride back to Lee Market, but then once more, he started to laugh. Our day of investigation had turned out to be a bit of a fiasco. I shook my head and could not help laughing as well. Follow that tanga? Where did you get that from? I asked. Parker burst into a further fit of laughter. Grandson of a Scotland Yard chief inspector, certainly not very effective thus far.
Great, that's great. That gives us a little taste of the novel. And I'll say that by the time I was finished with the novel, I was ready for the sequel. So I hope you have something in the works as far as that goes. Or not.
Well, it's hard not to. I mean, see, later then we were in India, and Hyderabad's a great city and historical and all that. And of course, I got a story there too. So I'm trying to finish that up this year too.
That's great.
It's really just for fun, you know. It's the
Sure.
it's the fun part of growing up in India.
Yeah.
There's so many things, aren't there, Kathy, that we really value about that experience.
Exactly.
Truly value about India and the people there, and feel privileged
Very
to
much
have
so.
had so many years in India.
Yeah, that's great. Well, in a moment, Manjusha is going to take over the question and answer period of several minutes where people can ask you some more questions, maybe more details about some of your work. And we, of course, didn't have a lot of time. This was an overview about the gentle answer and your work. And so we didn't have a lot of time to delve into any historical parts about Islam, nothing about Sharia law, nothing about the antagonism between the Sunnis and the Shias, as we know is very prevalent. But before I hand it over to Manjusha, I just wanted to ask if you wanted to talk about any current projects that you're working on right now, and if and how they relate also to this finding the gentle answer.
Thanks for the chance. Yeah, there's a couple I'm working on right now. One I'm sort of deep into and maybe about half finished. There's a project out of Birmingham, England, to write about Christian-Muslim relations. That is, the history of Christian-Muslim relations from the 7th century all the way to the 20th century. It's a huge project. It's been going for years. It's got 18 volumes already. And I was put in the group with the South Asia editors.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so we solicit, we write, and we edit entries for this work. You write about authors and their writings. And so right now we're doing the 19th century. So this was during the British times of the British Raj, the East India Company. becoming the direct rule of the British Raj. And there were many missionaries during that century that came into India, and it started up a real back and forth in writings. The attention of this series is in the writings. You write about what was written, all the things that Christians wrote about or against Islam, and all the things that Muslims have written about or against Christianity. You can see it's huge.
Wow.
But
Huge.
19th century lets me get back into, that era when many of the buildings and many of the infrastructure of India was built by the British that we used to use, going from Cody Road to, Central Station and Egmore to Hyderabad.
Right.
So I'm thick in that, writing and editing. The other project is sort of the beyond of our talk today, beyond the gentle answer. Gentle answer is still sort of answering back and forth, sort of apologetic, some might say polemic. Polemic has an edge to it. But in my case, I think there's something beyond, and that is, and I've seen this in the best writing about this, where you have a firm faith, you know the points of objection and difficulty that people of other faiths may have. And so you get inside their mind, their terms of reference, their worldview, and you seek to commend your own faith in terms that they appreciate. Not that they'll right away believe what you're saying, not that, but you're making that effort to explain what's precious to you and true to you in the very best way for that individual, and inviting a dialogue. Mm-hmm. So that's the beyond.
That sounds intriguing, and the other project sounds like it's an exhaustive piece of work, and also maybe exhausting at times. But Cody, thank you so much for talking to us today. And now, Manjusha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Gordon, for that important discussion and very relevant to our current situation globally. There was a question by Mona, so I'm going to ask Mona, do you want to just ask your question straight? I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Sure, I've forgotten what I asked, but
you could read it from the chat box.
Okay. Yeah, I was very interested to hear that you'd been challenged when you were in Pakistan by your Muslim friends and perhaps colleagues about the content of the Bible, and you mentioned that you would give a sort of gentle answer, which to me implied tone more than content. So I was wondering whether there were instances where, intellectually speaking, where their criticisms actually held water, and where you had to actually acknowledge that something they claimed was indeed true, or not. I would like to hear examples either way. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Mona. Just checking, you graduated 83?
That's right, 12 years after you did, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, what a privilege to graduate from Cody, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes, yes.
One of the things that our Muslim friends will do is criticize the behavior of Christians in history, and I'm always ready for that. I think Christians have not always, maybe not often, lived out their faith as they profess, and so there is that, and I'm in touch with that. They might, for example, in India or Pakistan, criticize the colonial era, what the British did, as they see it, what Christians did as they see the British. And so I'm also dealing with that in the historical writing. But the issues that keep coming up again and again in our conversations, in friendly conversation, this isn't, nobody's yet raising their voices, is the deity of Jesus, that is the divine glory of Jesus, and his redemptive death. So Islam says, yeah, and this is right down to the absolute lay level of Muslims, that Jesus is definitely not the Son of God, definitely not God, definitely not divine. Jesus did not die. Jesus did not die. And, you know, when I first heard that in Karachi from friends, what do you say? How do you respond? You're from the Bible, you're all ready to say he died and died with a purpose to save people. But what if the person then says the scripture that you're depending on for that truth, or what you say is the truth, is not reliable? That is it's corrupt and falsified. And so these arguments are powerful. Muslims have put a lot of intellectual history into this. It comes up all the time, and it needs the very best thinking. So in a sense, Mona, sometimes the questions of truth about who Jesus is challenge you to go back and say, okay, what is it quite what I believe? What actually does the Bible say? Can I believe what the Bible says? That for me is positive. The challenge is positive because it helps you to go back and work it through again. And so there's that criticism of Christian behavior, and there's also the challenge to the central items of our faith that causes Christians to work it through again and see if we got it wrong. Those are both positive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gordon, I'm going to ask you that question Sylvia asked earlier so that everyone can hear. We're very impressed that you taught Hebrew in Urdu. So could you just explain how that happened and how that worked? I'd love everyone to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And this is another wonderful thing about India, is that you hear people speaking many languages and your mind gets used to it. You know people that speak several all the time. And I remember the first morning we arrived in south of Hyderabad, in the place where my parents were going to serve, and waking up to hearing the ayahs speaking Telugu back and forth. Wonderful experience. And it trains your mind. You get to Kodi and then you hear Tamil. You know, get French in class. It gives you, it makes languages fun, and it sort of opens up. So to answer your question, when I went to Pakistan, then I'd learned Hebrew in seminary. And so the seminary there, Church of Pakistan Seminary, asked me to teach Hebrew. Fun, it was great. But the student said, listen, you know, you're teaching in English. We'd really like you to speak in Urdu. Why don't you hurry up and get to that point? So, well, that was part of my stress that totally challenged me, right, in Pakistan. But eventually got there where we could do that. And I was saying to Sylvia that by the end of some of those days, you were really mixed up with languages. You couldn't even speak English anymore. So it's a great thing that time in South Asia allows you to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. Rebecca, please go ahead.
Hey, Gordon, I graduated in 1968, so I'm sure we crossed paths somewhere.
Wow.
I'm curious about the stimulus for writing your book was the comments from your Muslim friends, and you wrote the book in response. What has been the response back from either those friends or other people of the Muslim faith that you know to your book?
Yeah, it's interesting because these days it comes up on Twitter. I'll be, checking my timeline, and there's somebody discussing the book. And maybe it'll be a Christian saying, I like the book and, it helped me. And then the Muslim is giving some objections like to the book. Maybe one said recently it's out of date. So that's since 2015. I haven't had many that will give a serious answer to the issues I raise. That is, in my PhD years, I learned about criticism of the Quran. That is academic criticism, not saying it's bad, but talking about its history, its manuscripts, where it came from, how it developed, the nature of the Arabic, et cetera, et cetera. And so I used that in the book to ask Muslims to be reasonable about using biblical criticism against the Bible when they won't use Quranic criticism against the Quran. In other words, if you're going to compare scriptures on the basis of the scholarship, put them on a level playing field. Talk about both. Because the goal is not to put down one or the other of the scriptures. The goal is to have a conversation, to actually be able to talk about the contents of the Quran and the Bible. And so this is how it comes up these days. Some of the, before Twitter was big, some of the Muslim polemicists would pick it up on YouTube and challenge me publicly, I'll debate this with you publicly. Well, I'm not a debater. I'm not quick on my feet, and I write. So, but that's another way that it's come up in the last few years. Rebecca.
Okay, thanks.
There's a question in the chat box from our guest, Arputaraj. Dr. Gordon, India is or was a home to many religions. However, interest to study religion is not much. You have many years of experience with working with Muslims. How did your academia help you? And what will be your suggestion for Indian Christians?
Okay, thank you, Arputaraj. There's a Tamil speaker. Yeah. Arputaraj, you say that there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in India studying religions. And I found this, SIAX, or South Asian Institute of Advanced Christian Studies in Bangalore, asked me to come for this purpose to establish a Center for Islamic Studies. From what we could find in that land of 1 billion people, there was no Christian program in Islamic studies. That is a Christian environment where you could learn about Islam and also be able to interact with it, with what you're learning from your own faith. And maybe some of you are surprised by that. Why would that be in a country with so many folks? But I think it's really important for Christians in India, Arputaraj is one of them, that we have some very good, knowledgeable teachers, writers, maybe even debaters, others who know Islam well, who know Hinduism well, who are relaxed with what they know, relaxed with their own faith, and who can do this gentle kind of discussions with people. One thing about these public discussions, I was in one in Hyderabad before 9/11, and perhaps the climate was okay there, a public dialogue with a Muslim preacher. You know, a lot of people like talking about religion, and they believe their own religion strongly. They believe they have good arguments for it. And if you are true to your faith and you tell the truth, they might not like what you say, but they understand what you're doing and they respect it. And this is my experience often in India, that people like to see firm faith. They like to see the practice of the faith. They like to see the confession of the faith. That's all part of the 5 pillars of Islam. And so that encouraged us to be firm in our faith. And we need those kinds of Indian scholars and leaders. So it has to be scholars from within. And this is quite possible. And I hope to see that in the coming days. Thanks for the question.
There's another question in the chat box by Paul Nazir. In how many languages the Gentle Answer book translated so far? How many Indian languages was it translated to? From Paul from Bangalore.
Oh, good. Thanks, Paul. Paul, we had some good experiences with translation. I was too busy to do much when I was teaching in Bangalore, but suddenly a student of mine from Chicago translated it into Korean just on his own and published it. Then friends in Kuala Lumpur translated into Mandarin. And can you imagine? I mean, if you read that, it's in Chinese script, of course, but it's got all the Arabic script that I put in there and the Greek script as well, the Hebrew script. It's a beautiful sort of production. Then in India, first of all, we had a translation into Telugu, Bengali. So that was actually done in Dhaka in Bangladesh. But of course, Bengali is huge in the Northeast. And we had a translation in Urdu, which is one we really wanted. It was the Urdu Hindi, but we got bogged down. Certain things happened. We couldn't get it out there. There's also an Arabic translation now, which we'd like to publish, but not able to do that yet. So yeah, it was a good run with translations, and as you know, translating makes you work through the ideas, and sometimes complex ideas, to put them in the local idiom. Yeah.
Gordy, if I could jump in, it's so nice to see you after 51 years or so. Again, I can't think of a time that we've run into each other, perhaps at a Labor Day reunion where I show up pretty regularly, and I can't actually recall that you have, but I remember you, and I remember those pictures back from our shared time together very well, and that I would never have said, you know, that the grin, that goofy grin that you had in grade 10 was an awkward grin or an uncool grin. I always thought that you were super cool. But then again, I'm class of 75, so I am to you as you are to Rebecca, perhaps a little bit.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
a little bit in awe. I can only imagine how I feel about Rebecca. I feel great affection to all Troutmans, of course, but in any case, my question, as you may know, I chose music as a career, or music chose me as a career, maybe a better way to say it, and I wondered, of course, Larry we know, is also wonderfully accomplished in that regard, and one of the things that was big for me about the time that you graduated in 70, 71, 72 was a series of really quite pointedly Christian musicals that we performed in the chapel and in the gym.
Yeah.
I was just in eighth and ninth grades at that time, and so you graduated in 71. I was in eighth grade then, so I don't specifically remember whether you were participants in that or whether Bruton folk in general, might have been led either to participate or not to, depending on how such things as public singing were treated as a practice, among faithful people. Can you speak at all to any of that? Can you refresh my memory whether that was your gig as well?
Yeah. First of all, can you hear me there, Chris?
Sure can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, right
Loud and
on.
clear.
Yeah, I'm actually on Elon Musk's Starlink here, where we live kind of remote. And so we pick it up from the satellites. So it won't always work. But yeah, music was a big part of my grade 11. It was in grade 11 that we started to sing some songs. Larry was a leader in that area. He was doing better with music. And there were some of the others that wanted to participate. Alden Petker played a trumpet. He was part of that. And then there was, see if I get this wrong, see if I get this right. I think it was Mr. Bjornstad. Is that right? Mr. Bjornstad, yeah. He led that musical when I was in grade 12 called Tell It Like It Is. It was a new kind of writing coming from California somewhere with Ralph Carmichael and who was his partner there. So yeah, it was as if there were these songs that were fun to sing in addition to the hymns we were learning. We sang hymns every night at Bruton.
Okay.
We knew the
Okay.
4-part
Great.
harmony. But Chris, just for fun, in those days, I thought bass guitar was pretty cool, but there was no bass guitar in Cody. And
No, that's true.
and so I asked, was it Mr. DeYoung was the music guy? And he pulled out a stand-up bass from a cupboard at the bottom of the chapel there, like way underneath. And,
That
and
that that area of the chapel was a little bit like a tent in Hogwarts or something like that. Much bigger on
right.
the inside than on the outside, and the stuff that was stored down there still kind of boggles the mind. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, this double bass, this stand-up bass had seen better days, and the neck had actually cracked, and it was fixed. And it had the original gut strings, and so that's how I learned to play bass. And
Nice. That's great. That's great.
and
I have
so
no
we
memory
used.
of that at all, but what a cool story.
Well, I tried to accompany, tell it like it is, but I wasn't very good. But after high school, I joined with Larry again, and Larry was leading sort of folk rock type quartets, and he pulled me into it, and that's where I learned to play bass well. So we made some records in those days in a group called Sound of Light. And these days, Chris, like I haven't followed the musical path. I've followed this other path. Larry has very much so, as you're saying. But these days I play in a little band in our local church with John, my younger brother, John. I don't know if you knew John. John
Didn't
is
know John. I
very,
knew Ronnie. I played a
Ronnie,
duet
yeah,
with Ronnie. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So,
And
yeah,
then John's
the
younger,
musical
and
Nichols. Okay.
yeah, he happens to live close to us. He's a very good baritone, good guitar player. And so we have a little trio of cello, stand-up bass, and guitar called the Stumps, we call ourselves. Well, that's
That's
interesting,
great. That's
Chris.
great.
Interesting.
Thanks for the memories. The tell it like it is. You know that was the sort of like the Christian musical, youth musical thing, and I remember the "moving to the rhythm of the truth" was the tagline from that song. But more famously, of course, that everybody seems to remember these days is that is the musical from which the song "Pass It On" comes, and "Pass It
Exactly.
On,"
Yeah.
grew
Mhm.
to a much to have a much broader audience, and yeah, good times.
That's right. And Chris, I got a chance in '72 then, a year after Cody, to go to a huge youth gathering in Dallas, Texas called Explo 72. And so we filled the Cotton Bowl, and then somebody started singing that song.
Mm,
And it
mm,
was amazing to hear, a whole like 100,000
right, right. That's
young
great.
people
That's great.
singing that song.
It's a great story.
Thank you, Gordon, for that. I think with that, we come to the end of the Q&A session, and we will be moving into an informal chat. You're all welcome to stay on. We'll be keeping the chat open, the Zoom open for another 15 minutes for an informal session. You can also log off if you have other things to do today. But I thank you all for joining us tonight. It was definitely a very informative session. It was wonderful going through your experiences, Gordon, as a child in Cody. And I love the photograph, especially the one where you're leaving Cody and there's a suitcase at the front of your car. From that experiences, your formative experiences, to giving the gentle answer, the challenges that you have faced, you are a true inspiration. And as our pastor Raja Krishnamurti said, it's very nice to see that our KIS alumni are brave to take a stand and speak, and you're definitely one of them who've taken a brave path that many of us have perhaps shied away because we're not certain, we're scared whether our faith will be challenged. Anyway, thank you for that. And thank you, Kathy, for coming in and leading this conversation. It definitely did. You wove it in together beautifully, I have to say. Thank you so much. All right. With that, I'll end the recording, and good night to everyone else. But welcome to stay back.
Okay.